Hello folks, Dan here. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Mythoverse from Wicked Publishing and the creator of Adobe Kroger, Dame Commander. It's an interesting, challenging, and exciting time to be producing independent comics. Over the last couple of years, there's been a significant rise in comics creators doing their own thing, from former professionals to first-timers going it alone. This can be attributed to ongoing dissatisfaction with what is readily available for most mainstream offerings, be that due to a lack of quality storytelling or far too overt political messaging. Whatever the case may be, there is no shortage of creators leveraging their talents to fill this gap in the market. One particular title has stood out almost from the beginning. That title is RAGS, from the writing team of Brian Ball and Trent Luther, with art by Luigi Terrell and featuring the likeness of Liz Finnegan as the lead. I've produced a few reviews for this series on my previous channel, so it's safe to say I'm a little bit familiar with the work. Some time has gone by since then, however, and now that 5 issues of the 7-issue limited series are now readily available, I think this is a good time to examine the series as a whole and to offer thoughts and address criticisms with the benefit of hindsight. To that end, I'm going to offer a review of each individual issue, 1 through 5, 5 being the latest available issue as of the time of this recording. Before I do, however, there have been some common criticisms that I would like to address on a more general level before getting into specifics. The more astute viewers may notice something of a running theme, and that theme is the word superficial. I say that word often because many of the points stem from only a superficial understanding of the series when the book begins to truly shine when it is properly understood. Also, tastes are obviously subjective. If you say something sucks, you aren't wrong. But for a criticism to have any real value, it needs to at least be logically sound and directed at an objective shortcoming of the thing being criticized. It also helps have a proper understanding of the thing being criticized. With all that in mind, let's get on with it. Commonly expressed criticisms of RAGS. Number 1. It's a zombie titty book. While a glance at the cover can't help but draw parallels to imagery commonly associated with grindhouse exploitation movies, vis-a-vis hot chick in her underwear with a big-ass gun and promises of trashy, gory violence, this cover is in fact very effective visual rhetoric. You can't help but look at it and think, the hell? That's what a cover is supposed to do, which is to grab your attention and pique your interest and curiosity. The best part is, even with the somewhat outlandish visuals, this cover actually tells you what you can expect, and that's the trick. That's where the visual rhetoric comes in. It's gotten your attention by evoking a visceral response like a well-crafted meme. So with all of that said, you dive into the story and find that there's quite a bit more under the hood. Yes, there is excessive nudity and excessive zombies in the book, but the nudity is used not for titillation but for thematic purposes, as are the zombies, as I will explain later. This brings us neatly to the next point. Number 2, the lead is a terrible person and I hate her. As before, this is a fair criticism on a superficial level. When we first meet our lead, she is already at the low point in her story. Suffice to say, she is, to say the least, salty. If all you do is flip through the pages and catch some of her more prominent early lines, you'll see that she lets fly with some choice, colorful language to people who are apparently only trying to help. Her insults are also some very low-hanging fruit, hitting below the belt with some tired stereotypes. Now, were it not for one panel, the criticism would be more than just superficially fair. Which panel is that? I mean this panel. This one moment where her carefully crafted defenses drop provide all the information we need. She lashes out as she does in issue 1 because she is terrified of being vulnerable. The reasons are merely hinted at in issue 1, but we don't need that information yet. All we need to know is this: she's acting the way she is because she is running from herself. As such, to anyone who pays attention, her tantrums and her vulgarity should serve to make her all the more sympathetic. Number 3, it's a slow burn, or nothing happens. This is a fair criticism again on a superficial level. What I think tends to bring this complaint on is that a reader may go in expecting the book to be one thing without realizing that it's actually something else as they read it. This goes back to the point made in number 1. While it may be logical to expect the aforementioned grindhouse exploitation story from its cover, it shouldn't take long for readers who really observe what they're reading to understand what the book is. So that I don't end up repeating myself too often, I'll segue directly into the next point from here, which is number 4. It's a zombie book, but we never develop the zombies. This is where we get into the you're not really paying attention territory. If by issue 3 you still think you're reading a zombie book, well then I'm afraid you've missed the point. This isn't a zombie book, and it isn't an action book either. While it does contain zombies and action, neither of these things are the book's core. The core of the book is Regina's struggle to stop running from herself and to actualize beyond her trauma. The zombies are merely a faceless yet undeniable threat that is used as a narrative device to draw this out of her. A corollary to this point is number 5. Zombies are played out. While this is in fact an opinion I hold, this is not a truth statement, nor is it a meaningful critique of the story's content. All I'm really saying is that I've seen the same story told with only superficial trivial differences too many times in too short a period. But putting all that aside, there are only so many stories to tell, and in the end what matters is less the setting or framework and more the execution and the characterization. An example I always go back to is The Belgariad by David Eddings. It's a very stock, paint-by-numbers fantasy story with a fairly predictable arc, and even as a young reader, I was able to recognize that. But even so, the characters are so vivid and full of life that it was nonetheless very engaging. The details are less important when the story has a strong emotional core. Without that, the details are far easier to focus on negatively. So even setting aside what was already mentioned about the role the zombies play in RAGS, our lead is compelling enough that it wouldn't matter anyway. Number 6. The art is horrible. No one's ever actually said that to my knowledge, and if they did, they're trolling. Even the most strident detractors of the series have to admit that Luigi Terrell has turned in the kind of artwork that launches legendary careers. Everything from anatomy to the intricate backgrounds, the facial expressions are invariably rendered with exquisite skill. When Regina hurts, we hurt with her, due in no small part to the exacting humanity with which she's drawn. With all of those criticisms out of the way, I think we have enough to go on to dive into the series proper. So without any further delay, Issue 1. The series begins with a few key points of information which we will need to follow the action, but no more than we actually need. There's a zombie outbreak. This outbreak is centered in California, which incidentally would pose a problem given its stringent gun laws, which was clearly the intent of the setting. We learn that our main character, Regina Rogowski, is a former Marine facing a less than honorable discharge. And with that, we open en media res with our main character running for her life from the immediately established threat of those damn zombies. She spends most of the book either nude or in underwear. Let me make something clear here. Don't get me wrong, she is very pleasant to look at, and like everything else in the book, she is exquisitely drawn. But as I hinted at before, her nudity is more tragedy than titillation. It is tension and characterization. What do I mean by that? Well, she's defenseless, which makes her constant aggression all the more pitiful and tragic. It's like watching a caged rat struggle against the bars. You know it's futile, but it puts its whole heart into it, and it's just sad to watch. I just feel terrible for her, honestly. I mean, the more she swears and lashes out, the more I just want to get her a nice warm mug of hot chocolate, maybe with some marshmallows in it, wrap her in a blanket, maybe get her a tub of hot water to soak her feet in, anything to get her some kind of relief, because she clearly desperately needs it. The one thing Regina is up against in issue 1, aside from the pesky, superficial, existential threat of the zombies, is her acute combat stress reaction. In the Marines, she was a mechanic who received a combat action ribbon, which is a decoration given to someone who participated in ground or surface combat acts. Now, that should get you thinking, why would a mechanic receive an award such as that without there being some severe circumstances involved? We likely have an individual here who is not the sort typically exposed to these circumstances, and she was likely forced to swallow far more than she could stomach. And here we have an exchange which demonstrates just how deeply she was damaged by her experiences. What she's demonstrating here is a common coping mechanism known as psychological projection. It involves projecting undesirable feelings or emotions onto someone else, rather than admitting to or dealing with the unwanted feelings or emotions. This tantrum isn't Regina attacking Sean, it's Regina running as fast as she can from herself, and she clearly has a lot to run from. I mean, look at this, look at that despair, that is the face of pure anguish. Seriously, our girl is wrecked and it's just getting started. It's not difficult to infer that she may be dealing with severe survivor's guilt. Like, why was I the one to make it out of there and get the combat action ribbon when everyone else didn't? Like Mr. Miyagi said in The Karate Kid when Daniel LaRusso tried to frame his combat ribbon. He pointed to his heart and said, "This mean you brave." Pointing to the ribbon, he said, "This mean you lucky." So as she spends all of her time running from herself, by the end of the book, there is nothing left for her to do but run. And that is where we leave off at the end of issue 1. Once again, as she's running, she's completely naked, and this again emphasizes her vulnerability, just like that poor guy in that John Copley painting, Watson and the Shark. As far as the aesthetics of the book are concerned, they are top tier. Much of the book is presented in grayscale, with exceptions made for the colors that comprise her tattoos, her hair, and freckles. At least that's how it appears in the first book. And this is only issue 1. The artwork increases in quality with each subsequent issue. Speaking of subsequent issues, issue 2. Now, before I go into any detail about the book itself, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the cover. Now, why would I do that? Well, because it's a very effective cover. Not only is it well composed and well drawn, but it tells you two very important things. Number one, you have all the information you need to know about the book's premise, setting, and protagonist just by glancing at it. I'll start with the protagonist. Right here's our main character, dead center, and she's carrying an M4 carbine. So, bam, she's a Marine. What's the setting? Well, look, it's a ruined city with piled up corpses, and that usually spells zombies. And what is her predicament? Well, have a look. She's got no clothes on. She's got this little flimsy shirt and some underwear, and that's it. So she's stuck right in the middle of a ruined city surrounded by zombies, and there's our premise. She's a Marine literally caught with her pants down, ill-equipped and ill-prepared to deal with this predicament. Or is she ill-prepared? Let's take a little bit of a closer look. Now, she may be in a rough spot, but she knows what she's doing. Look at that trigger discipline. I mean, her booger hook is off the bang switch, unlike politicians who pose with guns to scare us. And look down there at the weapon's muzzle. She's clearly just discharged the weapon, and she is the one walking away. And she's walking at an even pace, and her expression is collected, yet alert and wary, so she can handle herself. Whoever was on the other end of this transaction is the one sucking dirt. So this image tells us everything we need to know about the setting, premise, and protagonist, just through the visuals. Now, the second thing this cover does is depict an event that actually plays out in the book. Regina in underwear and shirt walking through the remains of this town with this weapon is something that we actually see taking place in the story. Now, you may be thinking, these are two fairly basic elements of a comic book cover to anyone who has so much as flipped through how to draw comics the Marvel way. But if you've had to wade through the endless parade of selfie covers or portfolio pieces that, while well drawn, have nothing to do with what happens in the issue, or may even feature characters that don't appear in so much as the background of a single panel of the book, it's easy to see why this cover is so refreshingly effective. The cover has a job to do, and this cover does it. It grabs you, tells you what you need to know about what's inside, and does it very well. Now, on top of all that, look at the lighting. The sun is low, and our girl here doesn't have much time left before she runs out of light. At least for me, this put a little bit of extra tension on the scene. Now, another thing I want to call your attention to before we move off the cover. Come down here again at the muzzle of the gun and see how the smoke is coming out of both the front and the side of the flash hider. That's a nice little detail, and it's easy to overlook that. I like that the gun has that much detail. This is a beautifully rendered weapon, and it's clearly done by someone who is paying a lot of attention to these technical details. Okay, enough about the cover. As fantastic as it is, you're going to be spending most of your time in the interior, so let's move on to that. Now, as I said before, I'm personally over zombies as a motif, and I have been for years, but this isn't really a zombie story any more than Star Wars was a story about a Death Star. The zombies are just there to be a threat that will force Regina to stop running and start fighting, and happily she gets to do a bit of that in this issue. So issue 2 picks up right where the last one left off, which was in the middle of a flashback, which itself served to tell us how Regina ended up where she was at the beginning of the story in issue 1. Now at the end of issue 1, she was naked and being chased all over town by a pack of ravenous zombies, but as issue 2 opens, she seems to have at least momentarily given them the slip. Now that the immediate threat is dealt with, she has a moment to collect herself and let her training take over. Now I really like this element. While I've been in my share of fistfights, I've never faced a genuine combat situation, so I'm going by secondhand accounts here. But from what I've been told, this is precisely what happens. You go from anxiety to problem solving pretty much immediately, with perhaps a little confusion mixed in. So she tells herself to remember her SERE training, S-E-R-E, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. Now this is just the right amount of military jargon to avoid alienating laymen, while at the same time you're giving a nice little nod to verisimilitude for veterans. Now this is demonstrated again in a flashback within this flashback, where we get a glimpse of a very bad day she had in Iraq. Now, before I go any further, let me say that I'm glad the creators have avoided turning Regina into the standard blandly badass action chick who can beat up 15 guys twice her size with one punch each. I mean, she can get hurt, she can get overpowered, she can bleed, and not just in a way that's aesthetically pleasing. Very early on, for example, she reminds us how vulnerable we can be running around in bare feet in the middle of a ruined city. The tiniest, even slightly sharp piece of debris can hobble you, and she spends a little bit of time dealing with that. I love that. The fact that she is vulnerable makes her victories, however small they may be, all the more satisfying. Why? Because we know there's a chance she can lose. It's just basic drama, or it should be anyway. Couple this with the Iraq flashback sequence where we see her unable to sleep, crunched up in a fetal position, trying in vain to drown out the voices, makes her feel like a relatable human being who we want to see rise above this low place. If we're there with her at this point, we'll be with her through every challenge, cheering her on. And all of that is why I don't care that there are zombies in this book, even though I'm bored with zombies. It's because I care about our protagonist. I mean, Regina could be put in any genre and I care what happens to her. She could be fighting flashing electric space slugs for all I care, because with her we have a strong emotional core. The art, especially the coloring, is top notch, in particular Regina's freckles, which in my opinion has become an indisposable aesthetic for the series at this point. I mean, I see a naked girl covered in freckles and I think RAGS. That's good visual branding. So anyway, if I had any gripes, it's that the font used in 2 parts of this book's narration was difficult to read without squinting. Maybe my eyes are going bad, but it tripped me up. Could just be me though. So while issue 2 does not move the narrative proper forward, it does provide us a little bit of an insight into why Regina is the way she is. We get a glimpse of some of the important events that have shaped her, but getting back to the present will have to wait for issue 3. So, moving on to issue 3, I think it's important to note that I think that the events of issue 3 serve to address the most common complaint detractors level at the series, aside of course from the nudity, which is Regina's character. It has been a common complaint throughout the early run of RAGS that Regina has been acting in a, let's call it an unreasonably salty manner in the first couple of issues, and that makes her unlikable and unrelatable. To that I say that yes, she has empirically been salty, but speaking for myself, there has been sufficient narrative information supplied as we've been going along in the first 2 issues to provide good reason for that attitude. If you don't happen to agree, then issue 3 should help put any doubts to rest as we see the rest of the events that led up to her situation in issue 1. To reiterate, for those who expressed distaste for Regina's behavior in earlier issues, here's where all of that pays off. In hindsight, would this have been a better place to begin the story? That is, go right from the flashback in issue 1 straight into this? Yeah, probably. In that case, you wouldn't have met Regina at the low point of her arc with no information to go on aside from a few visual hints. Maybe issue 3 wasn't the best place to finally pay all of that off fully, but this is where we are, and for the readers who get this far, they are rewarded with one holy hell of a damn ride. This is flat out, straight up a brutal issue, as the cover none too subtly insinuates. Regina is wrecked inside and out after this, and I'm frankly amazed she could even put on a show of being composed after the day she's had. She is caught unawares in a shower by a pair of male feminists who consider her a soft target for some depraved fun. If you can imagine going through everything Regina has already gone through to being placed in this situation almost immediately, then God bless you for keeping a non-psychotic smile on your face. Moments after this male feminist attempts to have his way with Regina, however, a battle ensues. The part that struck me the most about this battle was how viscerally ugly it is. We get to see a bit of Regina's combat training at the beginning. She deflects the muzzle of the weapon, pulls the weapon to force a discharge, and then releases the magazine to neutralize the threat. Regina is a trained Marine, and it shows. Unfortunately, just as it looks like she's got it under control, we are reminded that she is in fact barefoot on a wet surface, and she slips. From there, it's grappling and tackling and almost feral ferocity as Regina and the male feminist struggle for positive control of the weapon. And it's my understanding that this battle was originally intended to go on for longer and be even more grisly, but several panels didn't make the cut. Regina's only advantage is that she is grossly underestimated, and she finally gets the upper hand, until of course, the other male feminist comes to his friend's rescue. From there, she is brutally beaten, and her final link to safety and sanity is stripped from her when her engagement ring is taken. Thus, she is at her absolute lowest point, naked, beaten half to death, weaponless, and she can do nothing but scream in impotent fury. Fortunately, once she hits her lowest point, there's nowhere left to go but up, and so she calmly dresses as much as she can and begins her slow, painful ascent back upwards. We see once again a vision of her two loves, Sean and Rachel, this time providing her psychological center and guiding her to action. This is a marked difference from the beginning of the issue, in which we see them appear as manifestations of her guilt and self-loathing. If there were a better way at that moment to drive home the point that she is on her way back up from the low spot, I'd be hard-pressed to think of it. It has been something of a slow build-up, but I don't feel overly so. I mean, in order to properly convey the horror and its physical and psychological effects in a satisfying way, you can't half-ass it, and the RAGS team doesn't do things by halves. And there you have it. In terms of narrative, we are just about up to where Regina was when we met her in issue 1. So, if you feel you'd be a chipper Walmart greeter after being forced to endure all of this, well, you're a better person than I'll ever be, and God bless you. Her salty attitude, for me, only serves to make her more sympathetic, not less, because it's obvious it comes from a position of ridiculously acute vulnerability. Reg is a solid hot mess to begin with for many reasons that we get to see explicitly spelled out through the visuals in issue 3. And we see that despite her training and discipline, she's as prone to breakdowns as any other average Joe. She's not a boringly competent superheroine, she's a human being with limits both inside and out, and she can break at any moment. If that doesn't make her relatable, then I don't have any idea what would. The art has stepped up since issue 1 noticeably, especially the level of dynamic action and the coloring. Visually, this book is a home run, and it literally reeks of effort. This team, even that weird guy who keeps shoving his name everywhere, really love this project and we're getting their A-game. Little details like the alternate font for the omniscient narration stand out to me, as the font used here, what with its hastily scrawled, ragged appearance, suggests to me that it was written by someone scrambling to get information on paper before the zombies break down the door. Issue 3 wraps up a lot of the exposition and initial character development, and by the end of the issue, we're solidly in the present time and ready to start moving the story forward properly. One final thing I'd like to touch upon, though, is while yes, we do get to see copious amounts of vulnerability in Regina's character, we also get to see her bust out and kick some ass, and just be generally awesome. Issue 3 also ends with the introduction of a brand new character who actually is not brand new. He has made a subtle appearance earlier in the series. He is also one of the few characters to appear in full color from his introduction. And if you are a fan of Tim Lim, you will notice an adorable cameo as well. With all that in mind, now I think it would be a good time to move on to Issue 4. On to Issue 4. I like to refer to this issue as When the Levee Breaks. What we see is thousands of tons of pressure finally being released on one of the most powerful splash pages you're likely to see in an independently produced comic. But we'll get to that. First, let's get back to the story. We pick up immediately after the conclusion of Issue 3, with Regina being escorted by the scavenging team to what passes for a safe bunker, built out of an adult emporium store. It honestly feels to me that the writers are trolling their own character by setting the scene here, since Regina does finally get a bottom to wear, but of course her only option is a neon green strap-on dildo. Yes, it's colored. By now, Regina, like all of us reading, are more or less fine whatever, fuck it. The young lad from earlier tries to simp to Regina like before, but she's having none of it, even going so far as to reject an offer for a tent, and for that matter even bunking with the civilians at all. When she learns where the soldiers are staying, she throws back his coat and marches off naked to join people she feels she can relate to. This somewhat ominous panel of the young simp taking in her scent should remove all doubt as to his intentions for being so helpful. Now here's where the levee breaks in the aforementioned splash page. When Regina is finally permitted to collapse, we're reminded that Sean, her fiancé, was literally devoured by the zombies this very same day, which was the event which set this whole avalanche of shit loose on her. She has been so preoccupied with survival that she has not even had one spare moment to grieve the loss of her love. Now that she has a moment, out it all comes, and we see her literally being bombarded with memories. She is dead center of the page, surrounded by panels that appear to be assaulting her. We get some small insight into prior events which led her to this point, as well as an entire quadrant on the upper left devoted to the ring she just had ripped from her hand in issue 3 by the male feminists. And guess what? It doesn't stop there. We go straight into a nightmare flashback of the moment she lost Rachel in explicit detail. On the next page, she is woken by someone's loud snoring. We'll meet this someone in a minute, but the boots are the clue. So Regina gets up, meets a surly blue-haired Tumblrite who doesn't think highly of eating the same ration food yet again, and as a result also meets the character we formerly met at the end of issue 3, Operator. We've actually seen him before, but it was subtle. So Reg tries to queue up for food, but she's rebuffed for not following protocol she has no way of being aware of. Operator intervenes, and none too gently sees to getting Regina a plate, much to the chagrin of the other survivors. After a moment of glancing at the unfriendly crowd and the retreating Operator, whom no one clearly likes, she throws in with Operator. Later, at a meeting, which Regina only joins after her memories of Rachel encourage her to do so, a confrontation breaks out between Randy, the blue-haired Tumblrite, and the Operator. Randy, by the way, was mentioned earlier in the series, if you were paying attention. The Operator roasts Randy by dropping a well-placed Ghostbusters reference, and then stalks off with Regina in tow. Regina then gets a chance to begin to spend some time getting to know him as he checks for spare camis. We find that he's largely contemptuous of all the civilians, even those who take risks to find supplies since they don't go far out. Regina lets him know that she's disgusted by his disdain for the snowflakes in the Dolphinkins and the Tumblrites, which only serves to amuse him. Despite this somewhat cool kickoff to the relationship, issue 4 ends with the Operator reluctantly moving to intervene on Regina's behalf, as that young hornball from before demonstrates that he cannot take a none too subtle hint. Issue 4 is a very solid entry to the series, which finally lets us see what Regina's inner demons and traumas have done to her psyche. The artwork has ramped up, and we see stronger and more varied facial expressions, showing a wide range of emotions from sarcasm to resentment. As indie books go, you'll be very hard put to find artwork at this level consistently, and if that were all this book had to offer, that alone would make it stand out. We're also given a small hint at what is to come in issue 5 during Regina's conversations with the Operator. We see that she just might be seeing something of herself in the salty military man, which might just help her place her own feelings in perspective. With that in mind, let's just hop right on over to issue 5. Issue 5 is by far the main course of the entire series so far. If you've ever wanted to understand what the book was trying to accomplish, here it is, and it accomplishes it almost entirely through a very clever melding of visuals and dialogue. In fact, what we end up with in issue 5 is a healthy serving of both visual and written storytelling, thrown into a furiously spinning blender, giving us a top-shelf liquor cocktail that is both flavorful and satisfying. The narrative takes a brief pause at the very beginning for an expository flashback sequence, which serves the dual purpose of providing additional insight into Regina's backstory and setting up the above-mentioned cocktail. In this cocktail, we see Regina suddenly take on the role of the therapist to Operator's Regina. It's a very clever visual juxtaposition that drives home the nature of the discussion through visuals as a comic ought to. In a nutshell, we see that from the outside looking in, it's far easier to see the forest for the trees, so to speak. All of this appears to ostensibly be for the Operator's benefit, but Regina is very gradually being made whole as well, or at least she is beginning to. Real progress is made, and by the time we reach this splash page, and Regina declares herself, she is actualized, though not fully. How do we know she is not fully actualized? It's a combination of her dialogue and appearance on the panel. If you're curious what I mean by that last statement, reread the previous issues and pay attention to how color is used. The bulk of the issue draws elegant parallels between Regina's past and Operator's present, setting the stage for a meeting of the minds, of sorts. Both characters feel very real by the end of this book, which I hope will lead to the strong friendship both characters need in the final 2 issues in the series. The art reaches yet an even higher sunlit plateau from before. The facial expressions in particular are evidence of a strengthening style that is far more mature than only a couple of issues back. Luigi is an artist to keep your eyes on. RAGS issue 5 is a strongly satisfying culmination to everything that came before it. As we approach the final 2 issues in this series, I can honestly say, in all sincerity, that I have thoroughly enjoyed my visit into this world. In summary, RAGS is one of the strongest indie titles I've had the privilege of reading over the last 5 years or more. Not only is it very pleasing to look at and to read, the series rewards rereads due to the time and work put into the theme, to symbolism both visual and written, and allegory. The series is available through Antarctic Press, with special variants available on the creator's Patreon. I'll include a link to that in the description below. Thank you for watching. I'm Dan from the Mythoverse, and I'll be back soon with more reviews. Until then, stay safe and stay sane.